So, good morning, everybody. So, I have to say, I'm a little doubtful at the beginning of that labor clap a little earlier. That was very tentative, but it built to a nice crescendo. I saw it. I talked yesterday. I understand Katie Porter was here yesterday. That's cool. And you had about 400 people yesterday. And looking out, I don't quite see 400 here this morning. So that means some number of those 400 took full advantage of all the great nightlife options that Anaheim has to offer. So when you see your colleagues, commend them for their pursuit of excellence. I don't see anybody with sunglasses here today wearing them, so that's a good sign. But this event this weekend is to celebrate your 10th anniversary, so I want to congratulate you all on 10 years of wonderful work by NUHW. Give yourselves a round of applause. As it happens, in 2 weeks I'll be celebrating my own 10th anniversary. No applause, it's okay. So I thought it'd be good to sort of compare and contrast you guys to me. It's truly impressive how far NUHW has come in 10 years, how much you've done. You did what everyone said couldn't be done in 2009. You created your own very democratic, principled union in the face of great odds and in the face of the opposition of one of the largest healthcare unions in the country. So give yourselves one more round of applause, please. So, you are, for a good reason, one of the fastest growing healthcare union in the country. You have fought off concessions and bad deals accepted by other unions. You've won highly deserved and desperately needed increases in wages and benefits for your workers, and in many cases in my district. And so I'm proud of you for that. And you're right now forcing Kaiser Permanente, the nation's largest HMO, to start improving mental health care services, which are sorely needed. So one more last round of applause, and then I won't make you do it again. So, I don't know how else to put it, but NUHW kicks ass. And you're like the little union that could. So cool. My story, on the other hand, not necessarily quite as great. For anyone who's not familiar with my very sad tale, it's sort of rags, political rags to riches, and then back to rags story. And so I'm going to give you like a really quick version because I think it gives some insight into kind of what politics is like these days. After 2009, I was working in technology, had a decent career doing internet mumbo jumbo, and around 2012, I got interested in why young vets coming back to Southern California were having so much trouble finding decent career-oriented work after their completion of their service. And in their service in these two wars, which have gone on forever, two longest wars in the nation's history. And as a vet, that just didn't make any sense to me. And so, as you know, some vets come home and they have issues that need resolution before they can return to civilian life and to work. But for the vast majority, most do not. About 70% of vets do not have any such issues. And at that time, remember, the recession was finally over. And unemployment was coming down across the board, but not for veterans. And this didn't make a lot of sense to me because having served and knowing how competent and resourceful and just dedicated that your average soldier is, the unemployment rate for vets who don't have issues should have been 0%. And as it was markedly higher than civilian unemployment measures, and it still is. And so in 2012, I started a little nonprofit. It was called Armed Force to Workforce. In the sort of the search for a better model for connecting vets as they came home to employers who could benefit from the skills that they bring. I learned very quickly two things. One was, the problems related to vet employment were not necessarily attributable to there being too few nonprofits. In fact, there may be too many. I don't know if you've ever heard the stat, but the number of nonprofits in the U.S. that have veterans or the military somewhere in their mission is over 40,000. Right, so there's no lack of effort going into it, but there is a lack of coordination. In some cases, there's straight competition between nonprofits for resources and for support. The other problem that I found very quickly was it wasn't for lack of public support. It turns out that we spend lots and lots of your tax dollars in lots of different ways on programs that are ostensibly geared to helping vets move on to the next chapter, but they don't tend to be particularly well coordinated. And at the end, I think the big failure is that coordination, but also leadership. And it was really that experience which led to my deciding to run for office. I got really fed up at going to the job fairs and the Veterans Days and the flag raising ceremonies, and it always seemed there was always a politician there who was always so happy to have their picture taken with somebody in uniform with the flag in the background. But when I would buttonhole them and say, I think there's a better way to do this, they would always say, hey, call my office. This is Lori or Timmy or whomever. Call him or her, and they'll get you connected to me, and we'll meet. And guess how many meetings I ever actually had with an elected official about veterans issues? Turns out it was 0. And so one day, as I was griping, like I guess I do too often, my wife was listening to me, and she said, you know what? She said, our state senator, Bob Huff, is termed out in 2016. If you really want to make a difference, you should think about running. And so she would tell you right now that she did not mean it. That was probably her gentle way of saying, let me eat my dinner in peace. And she would tell you also that she has come to regret it about 1,000 times. But it got me to thinking, right? And it got the thing that I got focused on was this question about, we all love veterans. I've never heard anybody say a bad thing about the military and those who serve. But it raised the question to me, which is if we as a country, if we in government won't do the thing that everybody agrees on, right? Nobody would deny veterans in the military. It turns out we don't deny the military anything, and that's a problem. But if nobody would deny veterans anything, why haven't we made more progress? And if that's true, what are the odds that we're going to solve the harder problems, right, where there are competing constituencies and sort of competing arguments for different things? And so I decided to run. And in 2015, when I got in, it turns out I was the second Democrat, the third candidate in. I wasn't particularly well received by even my own party, despite having been very active locally. But through a bunch of sort of creative marketing and I think some good luck, I wound up coming in second in the primary. And then moving on to November, wound up winning what turned out to be the closest election in the entire state of California, and which also turned out to be, kind of oddly to me, not being from politics, the most expensive race at that time. And my race was so close, anybody who lives around here might remember, that it wasn't settled on Election Day, and it actually wasn't called for over 3 weeks until after the vote. And so for 24 days after Election Day, my district includes 3 counties. We counted little, buckets of votes by dribs and drabs. And I went from being down 3,900 votes on election night to eventually winning about 6 days before I was supposed to take office. My race was called, and I won by less than 1% by about 2,600 votes. And then got to go up to Sacramento, and I missed all the orientations and all the other stuff. And so for the first couple of months, I felt like that kid who got into college off the wait list, didn't know what the hell was going on. But I will say, having gotten to Sacramento, and anybody who's been to our capital, if you spend time in the capital in Sacramento, you will agree with what I'm saying, which is it's impossible not to spend time in that building and not feel inspired, not feel optimistic, because it was built at a time when California was young, but more importantly, when we were an idealistic, optimistic state, filled with idealistic people. And that still resides in that building. And so it really is a tremendous honor and a privilege to have had the opportunity to do that. I served on 5 committees in the state senate. I was on health, human services, insurance and banking, business professions, economic development, and Veterans Affairs. I was proud to be the chair of Veterans Affairs. I was glad to be a part of some important conversations, including single-payer health care, as it moved through my committees. In my time in the Senate, I moved a bunch of good legislation about which I'm proud. Got to increase funding for veterans at community colleges to make sure they got better support when they came home. Got to ensure that veterans and military families weren't unfairly denied access to public benefits just because they were accessing their educational benefits. But more importantly for here, I got a bill passed that closed loopholes pertaining to mental health coverage by extending the authority of the California Department of Insurance to enforce the Paul Wellstone and Pete Dominici Mental Health Parity Act. And we also locally, I secured funding by way of $20 million a year for a 10-city collaborative program which is addressing the root causes of homelessness and youth violence, which is in now its 3rd year and is going very well. In addition to my work in Sacramento, I'm also proud to say that I got to make a difference locally. I stood with the workers, NUHW workers at the Fountain Valley facility when you put up a seriously good fight and won that battle. And I will say, and we were talking out front, and so, politics and politicians kind of get a bad rap these days, and for good reason. The biggest reason of which is a guy named Donald Trump. But for me, again, having had the chance to serve, there is no greater honor, but it's also really important in a state as big as California with as many challenges as we have. It really does matter who represents us. It really does matter who represents you. And consider there's 435 members of the House of Representatives. There's only 40 state senators in a state of 40 million people. And I remember my wife was going to give me a little grief when I first got elected, and I thought I could turn the tables on her. And I said, listen, when you think about it, right, there's 40 million people in California. There's only 40 state senators. That's one senator for 1 million people. That makes me 1 in a million. And my wife looked at me and said, you ran against 2 other people. You are 1 in 3. And she's probably right. But let me tell you, so, again, to compare my journey to yours, here's where the story goes a little bit south. In April of 2017, we voted in the legislature for a bill, SB 1, which has colloquially become known as the gas tax, to address a huge need in California. Anybody who's driven in California, you know just how desperate the situation is with respect to our infrastructure, roads, bridges, dams, et cetera. And so at that time, there was an effort that had been going on for more than 5 years. It finally came to a vote. And largely because, one thing I didn't mention, the reason my election got so much attention in 2016 was it also, in addition to getting me elected in a very narrow election, it had the net consequence of giving Democrats 2/3 majorities in both houses of the legislature. In order to do certain things, including raise revenues, also known as raising taxes, you need 2/3 majorities. And so this was the first chance in April to do something which they hadn't been able to do for many, many years. And so we voted on sort of the not appetizing prospect, from my point of view, to do what I had to agree was the right thing, which was to find the resources to make the investments that we'd been putting off for almost 30 years. The federal government has been talking about doing infrastructure. It seems like every week's infrastructure week in the Trump administration. They haven't done it. And so the legislature, to its credit, took it upon itself to raise that money. And so we passed a tax. It raised your gasoline by 12 cents a gallon. Sorry about that. And I say sorry about that because it turns out I wound up taking the blame. 81 of us voted that day, 27 in my House, 54 in the Assembly, and in the state Senate. To get to 27 votes, it took a Republican, nice guy named Anthony Cannella, who made a deal with the governor, Jerry Brown at the time, for $400 million in priority spending in his district. He was termed out, so he said, that's a good deal. And so we voted, it passed. On the same day it passed, we passed a constitutional amendment, which became Prop 69. I don't know if you remember, but that was the one that protects that money, makes sure that we can only spend it on the things for which it is intended. I was the author of that bill. And so we left on April 6th. The night of April 6th, it was a Thursday for our first spring recess. And so I had been, kind of running for office and then getting settled and doing my new job for nigh on about a year and a half. My wife and I, being terrible planners, actually had a baby during the campaign. And so this was our first chance in that spring recess to take a vacation. So we went, turns out we went to the Caribbean, went to the island of St. Lucia, which is very nice. I would recommend it, except for me. We got there after about a day's travel with a little kid, which is brutal, as you probably know. And we then took a van from the airport. It took about an hour and a half up this windy road. We got to our little hotel. And naturally, the first thing I asked, my wife, the first thing she asked was, where can we store the breast milk? First thing I asked was, what's the internet Wi-Fi password? And she looked at me like, what's wrong with you? And so I looked back at her. I said, listen, I'm here. Like, let me just check my email. And from then, I promise I'll put my phone away. I'll be so present. We're going to have a wonderful vacation. And so I got the Wi-Fi password, and the only place in this hotel that had Wi-Fi was in the sort of the main hall, the reception hall, which explained why there were like 50 kids all sitting around there, all on their phones, because they didn't want to be on vacation with their parents. So the Wi-Fi was super slow, and so as my wife's carrying around all our stuff, and she's looking at me like she's about to hit me, except she had all that stuff, so she couldn't hit me. And I said, just give me a second, I'm going to just check my email. And so I remember the emails were kind of coming through, the way they sort of download. And one came through, and it was a headline from the Sacramento Bee, and I will never forget it, because it said, Republicans target Southern California Democrat for recall over tax vote. So being the naive guy I am, I thought, oh my God, somebody's in so much trouble. And I thought, I'm going to be so supportive to my friend Sharon Quirk-Silva, or Sabrina Cervantes, because these districts are so hard on them. So then I clicked on the link, and it rendered really slowly, slow internet, and lo and behold, it was my fucking picture. So no offense. All right, so congratulations on your 10 years. My next year was, basically, I don't know how else to put it, was being hunted down by the Republican Party that had an opportunity to use my vote on the gas tax as a pretext for getting a redo on an election that they were very mad about losing. And I will say, we put up a good fight in the June 2018 primary. Turnout was relatively low in my district. It was really kind of noisy because of the congressional stuff. And people know what they know about politics. On my side, we didn't do too well. On the other side, there were a lot of people apparently mad about the cost of gas, and I lost. And I didn't lose for lack of support from people that I care deeply about, and I did not lose for lack of support from NUHW. So thank you so much for that support. So if you recall, in November of last year, the November of the general election, not only did we get some wonderful people elected to Congress in Orange County, finally flipping Orange County into what it should be, not red or blue, but a place represented by good, smart people who care about you. And I want to thank you all for the work you did there. We also, rejected the proposition that would repeal the gas tax. And people have come up to me and they say, well, isn't that validating, Josh, that we rejected the repeal of the gas tax? To which I say, no, it's not. No, it's not. What would be really validating would be getting my old job back. And so, being the pig-headed idealist I am, that's exactly what I plan to do is in next coming November. Thank you. And I will say, if I've learned anything from experience, it turns out there are worse things than losing an election, right? And so I don't have any regrets about the vote. I will also say the opportunity to work with so many good people and good organizations, good labor unions, has been wonderful for me. And it tells you how big the task is before us and how much work we need to do, but we are making progress. When I told my wife about 8 months ago that I was thinking about doing this again, she kind of looked at me. We were in the kitchen, and she kind of went, oh, like that. And I said, I think this is worth doing again. And she went, and I said, seriously, it can't get any worse, right? And so my wife's really smart. She looked at me, she said, it can always get worse, Josh. And so I said, okay. She said, so listen, she got kind of serious. She said, listen, if you're going to run again, you're going to promise me 2 things. So I said, what? And she said, okay, first is if you run and lose, you've got to promise me you won't become one of those bitter old men, that's all mad the rest of your life that you didn't get the thing you want. And so I kind of interrupted her and I said, do I seem bitter now? And she said, no, but it might be a delayed reaction thing. You might be still kind of in shock. And I said, okay, what's the other thing? She said, if you got to promise me that if you run and lose, that you will never run for anything again the rest of our lives. And I said, it made me think, it is hard to be in politics. It's really hard on your family. I mean, think about, what you do for your members. It's hard on your families as well. And I had to realize that's fair, right? And so I said to her, absolutely, you have my promise, thinking the whole time, I'm not going to lose, so I'll never have to keep this promise. And I still believe that to my core. And I will say, I like my chances. If there's an upside to kind of the national nightmare that we've been living, it's that here in California, Donald Trump is going to be the most motivating force you have ever seen in the next set of elections. And it's going to help all the good people we got elected in 2018 and hopefully, coincidentally, also help me. The other good thing probably about getting kicked out is it does give you sort of pause to think about what it means to serve and what it means to be an elected official, at least prospectively. And I'll say, I think if you do the job right, it shouldn't be glamorous. It's actually a lot of work. And a lot of the things that people I find think are so important, elected people, like sitting at the head table and all the gear-free crap you get, doesn't mean a ton to me, although I do appreciate the knapsack you guys gave me, so thank you. Everything except the NUHW stuff. It doesn't mean anything to me. But the opportunity to serve is important, and there is critical work that needs to be done in California. This is a wonderful state. It is, but it also has some serious challenges. And two of the things that need fixing are right dead center in where NUHW does its work. Access to affordable health care, which I, like you, believe is a right, right? And you guys are right in the forefront. And just as importantly, rising income inequality in California, which is totally out of hand, and government must play a role in redressing the systemic imbalances that have made that so possible. So thank you for that. And so I want to be there again to work with you. I want to say, thank you so much, NUHW, for what you do and for what you stand for. Nobody does more for patients than you folks. Nobody has borne the brunt of our effed up healthcare system in the United States than your workers, and so we need to fix that. And so, Tony, coming from work to do this, all these other people came from a bar right before, right? So thank you. And also, thank you, Sal Roselli, for being an inspiration to me, for being an example of what a principled, dedicated labor leader looks like. You're a role model to me. It's a blessing to everybody here. Thank you all for having me here today. Thank you for your support. Go NUHW.
This one's got your name on it.
See, like I said, only the NUHW stuff. It's the only stuff I want. Thanks.